Hi, everyone, and welcome to another wonderful session that we've got lined up for you guys, which is part of Todd Moon's Vision, which is a free and radical creative online series for radical pioneers. And in this session, it is titled How to Change, not to change, it's how to engage with politics and politicians and political institutions. And I've got a really special guest in Abdiaziz Suleiman. And Abdiaziz Suleiman, which I'm sure he'll kind of go into who he is. He is a political operative and he has got extensive experience as a political consultant in working in the European Parliament, British Parliament, as well as working with international political leaders. So we're very, very fortunate for him to be joining us today. Just to introduce myself, my name is Magid. A bit of a visual description. I am a black male wearing a beige cap facing forward. I've got a grey hoodie. I have got a bit of a fuzzy beard, basically. And I am one of the non-executive directors of Todd Moon, as well as the board member of the University of the Underground, which this wonderful series of events is part of. I, in a former life, was an elected politician, author, custard connoisseur, you name it, basically. I've pretty much nearly done it. But yeah, no, really, really excited. Just before we do kick off, however, I want to share with you all a really, really exciting opportunity. So let me just share my screen. So guys, as part of Tour de Moon, there's a real amazing opportunity to get funded to make new creative projects and feature in the festival. So we're practically giving away £1 million. So if anyone's interested in, making a immersive film, we'll give you £25,000 each. Anyone wants to make a short film, you can do that. If anyone wants to create a digital piece of artwork or be the voice of the moon, you can get funded for that. You want to perform, there's funding for that. If you want to write a short play, or maybe you just want to DJ, hey, you can get funding for that. Maybe writing's more your style. Like you can submit a piece of writing to the zine. Heck, maybe you don't want to write, you want to be the creative editor for the zine. That opportunity is also there as well. So there's really lots of opportunities. There's Moon Music. There's the Moon Bar. There's literally like Moon Sports. You can take part in a Moon Sports, believe it or not. There's a Moon Convoy. There's literally there's so much things you can do, and I really encourage as many people as possible to engage, let all your friends and your family know, and kind of just really just get involved with this once in a lifetime super unique opportunity. And that being said, I would like to invite our dear guest Abdiaziz Suleiman to give a visual description of himself. But before we start, guys, this session is being recorded to let people know, but also if anyone wants to have access to the closed captions live transcriptions, you can click on the button at the toolbar at the bottom there. So Abdiaziz, if you can give a visual description of yourself and introduction, that would be fantastic. Over to you.
Okay. Black male, early 30s, bit of curly hair on my head. I think that works on the visual front. Does it? Black jumper, basically a lot of black.
Yeah, a bit of an afro, bit of a kind of a curly afro.
Yeah, a bit of a curly afro.
Shall we say? Abdiaziz, so basically, I guess the whole session of today is just how, it's the part of the series has basically been about a lot of practical guides. So it's always been about how to, because we really want to give as much advice and as much just words of wisdom, but basically just points of action for people to learn and do, basically. So this session is titled How to Engage in Politics. So I think many people have got different perspective of what politics is, basically, right? For many people, politics is the action that you do at the ballot box at a general election. Some people even just only vote at general election. It can be local elections. Some people might not even consider, for example, say a vote in your union as politics, so a vote in your student union, a form of politics. So it'd be kind of good to, I guess, in terms of someone who's a political consultant, how would you describe what politics is?
So I think politics is asking the question of who gets what, when, and how. It's asking the question of we're sharing things. Maybe we're sharing space, maybe we're sharing a society, maybe we're sharing resources, maybe we're sharing just being neighbors, whatever it is, right? But how do we negotiate that? How do we get around the fact that some people need certain things, some people want certain things, and how do we make sure that, and actually different people have different philosophies. Some people think that, okay, I don't need to care about my neighbor. My neighbor's none of my business, right? I'm looking after myself. And some people think that inherently politics should always be about how's my neighbor doing? How are my friends doing? How are people around me doing? And how are the people who need the most doing, right? So I think politics is about asking those questions of how we negotiate the business of living together as human beings in this world. So that is what really, that's what it comes down to. Now, we might decide to vote our way to those decisions. We might decide to have various other ways of getting to those sorts of decisions. But politics will always kind of come down to that negotiation between people on how they're going to live around each other, especially in relation to power and especially in relation to resources. Who has the power? Who has the resources? And how do other people get those things?
Definitely. And I think what's kind of really fascinating is the fact that many people don't think something is political. Like I hear it often, like, people say, well, why is this certain person saying, why are they being political? Not understanding that politics is in every single thing that we do, because somebody had to make a decision. Somebody had to decide things had to be this way. Like the world and society that we live in didn't happen by accident. Like, it's happened by design. You can argue mainly by white men in suits kind of thing, but it's like somebody designed, and it doesn't have to be like that, basically, right? So I guess it's, how do we, like, what's one of the kind of toolkits, would you say, in terms of how can we get ordinary people to change their way of thinking, to understand or realizing the fact that everything is somehow inherently political or linked to politics? Because people be like, well, how is football political? Like, how is people really struggle at times to make the connection of what means something, like what means something to them, or what they're passionate about in their world, and politics. How do we bridge that gap?
So one of the things that actually often very right-wing movements try to do is that they have this phrase, and you'll have seen it quite often, and it kind of goes, there is no alternative. And the reason that phrase is so important is because when people look at the alternatives, they begin to realize that the situation they live in and the way things aren't inevitable. So football's a really good example, right? In the UK, we're kind of sold this idea that football needs to be owned by super wealthy investors from anywhere else in the world, that it's their company, the football team is just kind of a debt for them, the ticket prices should be high so they can get their money back, and it's basically just an investment, and so be it. Whereas, say, in Germany, actually, it's much more normal to have fans own the club. It's much more normal for people to be able to afford to go inside the stadium. And we're talking about gigantic teams, but the tickets are affordable, right? And I think just by seeing the alternatives, the penny starts to drop. The wait a minute. So you're telling me that things didn't have to be this way. And I think, for example, one of the best defenses of the NHS for the average person isn't even to say, look at the NHS, hasn't helped you in the past. It's because the average person will look at America and say, I'm so happy that I don't have to ask, I don't have to worry about paying for hospital beds. I'm so happy that I'm not thinking about ambulances and how much it's going to cost me if I go there. I'm so happy that these are not worries. If I get a cut, I'm thinking about the cut. I'm not thinking about the cost. And the existence of alternative ways of living and dealing with political questions and all sorts of questions, whether they be in politics and culture and other places, it's these alternatives that make it really obvious to us that politics is everywhere. Right. So, talking about culture, funny enough, I remember there was a story of like a Labour minister in the 50s or something who was like, we've reached socialism now, and so we can invest all our money in the arts, right? And it kind of gives you a sense that actually the past is also an alternative that we can sometimes look at and go, wait a minute, so you're telling me there was a time when politicians were thinking that we've reached the nirvana now, so let's start funneling money into the arts, because surely that's all we really want, right? We all just want the arts. We just want to be able to express and enjoy and try to create and live within those creations, right? As opposed to, being told that like the only way to live is to work until the last day. You are nothing but a productive cog in the machine. So kind of, I know I've kind of gone on for a bit there, but I guess my answer is that the alternatives are often the strongest way of getting people to get it. It's the best way of shaking someone and going, actually, things don't have to be this way. And here's places in the past, here's places in the present, and here's other ways of doing this thing. And it can be anything. Like I said, it can be the arts, it can be sports, it can be taxation, it can be everything. There's always an alternative. I mean, that should always be our slogan, right? There is always an alternative. Whereas actually the slogan of people who are quite anti-progressive is there is no alternative. This is the only thing you can do.
Definitely. I guess before we start really looking at the relationships that politics or the agents of politicians have with their electorate, shall we say, how can somebody who may be listening now or who would be basically just watching this video later on, it's thinking, well, do you know what, I'm not happy about X, Y, Z, but these politicians I just see them on TV. I feel like I am so disconnected. I think one of the reasons many people feel disconnected with politicians is because the people that we elect to be our leaders don't reflect who they're there to represent. They don't reflect us. So there's always this kind of barrier or distance between people and their elected representatives. I'm not saying that's for all politicians, but for the most case it is. So how can somebody, what is the easiest or the most effective way? And I guess I'm assuming it just depends on what circumstances, what their purpose and aim to kind of get it. But what's the best way for somebody to engage directly with their elected representatives?
So I think you can go different ways. And I think actually yourself is an incredibly good example of someone who was like, okay, well, how do I bring some of the aesthetic? How do I bring some culture? How do I bring that into the business of trying to change people's minds on things, right? And I think you use your talents and your skill sets to go, which role do I want in this, right? Do I want to be the decision maker? Is that what I want to do, right? Am I so sick and tired of the decisions I've seen done that I'm like, I actually probably could do these, right? Or do I want to be behind the scenes helping the decision makers? Or do I want to run campaigns trying to influence the decision makers, right? Because in a way, what we're always doing is we're gravitating around the decision makers because they're the ones who get to pick whether this library stays open or this library stays closed. They're the ones who get to pick whether this big transport project happens or it doesn't. They're the ones who get to pick whether this thing happens that's got to do with arts funding or this thing doesn't happen. And I think when you're focusing on the decision makers, it becomes much easier to go, which role do I play? Now, once you've kind of picked your role, right, it's about using the talents that you have, right? So if you are someone that has a very strong sense of popular culture, and I know it's something we've spoken about a lot before, right? Actually, if you have a good sense of popular culture, you're interested in it, then you can use popular culture for social change, right? I've seen it, there's a phrase I've heard you say more than once, but you can also get people who go, actually, I love numbers. So I'm going to use my understanding of numbers to calculate what the best way of winning an election is, right? And some people go, you know what, I'm just a super helpful person. I'm a hardworking person, and I'm going to join a campaign, right? And I'm going to put energy in, and I'm going to believe in it. And that's what I'm going to bring, right? In the end, the most important part is that sense of ownership over politics. The most important thing is that sense that politics is not someone else's business, it's my business. Right? That power is not something that someone else gets to enjoy, it's something that all of us get to enjoy. And the people who are in power are super good at trying to make it feel exclusive, make it feel distant, because underneath it all, they kind of understand if they don't do that, what ends up happening is they may be forced to share power. And some people in power are incredibly bad at being forced to share power, because in a way it's a thing they've got. So why would they want to give it to anybody else? So our job is not to be afraid of power, is not to be afraid of those in power, is not to be afraid of the possibility that we might want to use power, right? But we have to have a very clear sense of what we're going to use it for, right? Which is why it's often good to come in through a campaign, which is why it's really good to see other people who are doing things like yourselves, which is why it's really good to actually look at the political system and the processes. I know often it's like, let's smash the system, let's break the system, but you've got to understand the system first. Right? Because once you're in power, you can change the system, and the system will try to stop you, But for someone who's dedicated and committed, it's entirely possible. And even more so if there's lots of people who agree with them, have the same energy and the same values as them, and want to bring that too. So I think the thing I really want to emphasize is the fact that the skills that you have, the things you're interested in, are not something you have to hide from politics. And that's a great mistake people make, right? People feel like they've got to put a suit on and act all serious because that's what politicians do. No. Politicians should not, there should not be this idea of this is what a politician is like. At the end of the day, a politician should, in theory, just be any individual who is using some of the collective power that we have given them, right? And therefore, there's no reason why none of us should use that. It's our power, by the way, right? We've gifted that power to central authorities of different forms, right? It's not something that they haven't miraculously got it from the sky. It's not suddenly appeared. They are genuinely using our power, and therefore sometimes it's okay for us to use it as well. And it's okay for us to turn up looking exactly how we look, acting exactly how we act. The only thing we've got to do is try to connect with other people. And listen, politicians will do everything they can, the professional politicians, you want to call it that, to try to appeal to people. But often the best people at appealing to people are just normal people, right? So I think that's the other thing, is not to underestimate the fact that already you will have a better sense of connection to the average person, right? Or to the person you're trying to appeal to, than the average politician who spent all their time trying to either build distance or has spent so much time away from people, they've forgotten what people are thinking, what they're feeling, It's something journalists, and I'm not going to say a lot of journalists themselves are kind of distant, but, journalists often do this to politicians where they go, how much does it cost for a pint of milk, right? And it's actually quite an interesting question, because it kind of raises the point of, is that something you still do in your life? Do you still go out and buy a pint of milk, right? And it's quite an instructive question, because most of us do have to still go out and do that, I mean, there's alternative milks, of course, but I just mean, you do go out to get, your milk, whatever that is. And if the answer is, no, I don't do that anymore, it's fair to do. Some people are super busy. But you do realize you're getting ever less relatable. And the distance between you and the people for whom you're wielding power is growing and growing and growing, right? So I don't want to, again, go over the top and over talk, but kind of the thought is that it's important to analyze the situation, assess the situation, understand the processes, understand the system, but it's even more important to remain utterly authentic, to be yourself, to bring yourself to that situation. And you will be surprised that even if you don't happen to win an election, you will meet people who fundamentally agree with you. And that is the beginning of something, right? And never underestimate how important the beginning of something is.
Apologies about that, everyone. I had a bit of a power cut where I am at the moment. Sorry, 1 second. Brilliant. Abdiaziz, I guess in terms of because there's many, because I think when we talk about engaging in politics, sometimes people can really think in terms of locality, in terms of well, okay, I know what's happening locally, I'm just going to get involved in locally. Some people only do it with nationally kind of thing, right? I guess someone who's got experience with working across borders, across Europe and extensive in different parts of the world, what are the similarities in terms of have you seen in terms of people engaging in politics, say in South America? Have you noticed a trend in terms of different people engaging with politicians or politics in different ways, and what can we learn?
I mean, there will be cultural differences. There's always a difference in how people see politics. In some parts of the world, politics is, some parts of the world, politics is a high status thing where people will, people will be quite, self-important the second they're in any form of politics. Some parts of the world is much more casual, right? Some countries, the prime minister walks around without bodyguards, and it's just kind of a pretty normal thing to see them walking around. And some countries in the world, the president doesn't go through without a convoy, right? Half the city has to be shut down for them, right? So there's always a difference kind of in the status of politics, if we want to call that. But actually, once you strip away the outward kind of pretenses, underneath it all, they're human beings, and they're driven by human sentiments. They want to be remembered. They want to do something extraordinary. They don't want to, they want to be successful, whatever success means to them, right? what it means is that your local politician at your local level is often having similar sorts of thoughts about their own sense of importance as the president or the prime minister of a country, which kind of raises the question, right? What happens if you get access to some of these people? Because that's often the problem with politics, is that the higher up people get, the more difficult it is to access them. But if you can access people, often actually what you're appealing to is a human being with a set of interests whom actually you might be able to make an incredibly persuasive argument to. Now, that doesn't change something, which is your sense of authenticity and your sense of value shouldn't change who you're talking to, right? Whether you are talking to, someone who is, represents 10 people or someone who represents 10 million people, right? If you believe in things, if you have causes, if you have things you care about, maybe those things are in, maybe those things are in social justice, maybe those things are in art, maybe those things are, are about taxation, whatever it happens to be, you shouldn't change your sense of authenticity. But you should also understand that with all of the different types of varieties, you're still dealing with people who are often driven by very human things. So you need to also engage with people on a human level. I often think that actually when you're dealing with politicians, it's important to be persistent but polite, right? Like there's nothing wrong with being persistent, right? These people haven't entered politics so that they can ignore everyone. They may try, but your job is not to be ignored, right? That's what you're doing.
100%. And on that, Abdiaziz, it's at times, of course, politicians do ignore their electorate kind of thing because they may see them as a nuisance, so they kind of feel like they're just not important kind of thing, especially if it's, say, a safe seat or it's an elected representative who has got such a majority. It really doesn't matter what they do. They can't basically be unseated. But the thing is, it's like every politician wants to be re-elected fundamentally, right? And in terms of there's a big thing of basically giving politicians a mandate. Say, for example, if you care about the climate, right, and you feel as if like your MP or your local council, your member of European Parliament isn't speaking about it and you want them to speak about it. And how do you do that? You just organize it. Well, listen, you represent us and look at us. Even if it's literally right, if you take a picture and look at all of us like this playing football, or just to kind of show the relevance and the understanding that you have of how things work. Because a lot of times politicians rely on people not knowing how politics works for them to kind of get away with what they're doing. So how, like, if somebody has got a politician, say for example, a politician that they didn't vote for, because of course that is quite common. We've like a time we haven't got to say, of course we can vote on the ballot, but depending where we live and what our values are, we may not have an elected representative that necessarily represents us. So before I kind of share my offers, how can somebody still engage with a political institutional political like MP or whatever representative that they fundamentally disagree with? Because at the end of the day, they still represent them.
Absolutely. And I think that I would carry on from that thought. It doesn't matter whether you voted or you didn't vote. It doesn't matter whether you voted for that person or didn't vote for that person. If they represent you, they represent you, right? Which means you have a right to access, you have a right to make your arguments, and actually you have a right to be persistent and to be demanding, right? I mean, within reason, like, no one, I'm not calling people to be out there harassing, right? But I'm saying that, you're allowed to be persistent. This is your representative. This is the person that is meant to be the expression of you in that space, whether it's the council, the parliament, the whatever. And therefore, and by the way, never underestimate the fact that even a politician who has a very safe seat, they don't want to look bad, right? Just because it would take, heaven and earth to make me lose the seat, doesn't mean I want to be the one MP who's constantly looking bad, right? And it's very easy to make a politician look bad because there's lots of places they go, right? If you're protesting at those places, if you're talking at those places, if you're going to those places, if you're talking to the press, right? If they won't talk to you, then talk to people they listen to, right? They listen to the press, go talk to them. If they won't talk to you, go talk to their voters, right? Often this happens, actually, I think with Tories in particular, people, oh yeah, we can't influence the Tories. Maybe the Tory politician won't talk to you, but when you start talking to pensioners, when you start talking to people that vote Tory, right? And you start telling them about climate change, or you start telling them about environmental degradation, and you start saying, by the way, you do know the MP doesn't care, and he's not doing anything, and he won't listen to us, but he'll listen to you. People like to take on a bit of responsibility. People actually like that sense that they are also, because in a way, your fellow voters can become your advocate. So never underestimate the fact that actually every single other person that's represented by this person is a potential ally in convincing this person. And like I said, no one seat is so safe that it's unassailable. And this is the other thing. It's not just the safeness of a seat. It's also about the fact that people who often have safe seats really don't want to go through the energy of an election. And if you actually do put them under any pressure, if you're persistent, if you keep turning up in the local media or the national media or media that they engage with, right, then they're starting to worry about their seat. And the last thing they want to do is throw all their energy into an election. And sometimes it's a lot easier to appease. I think one thing I'll say just before I finish this bit, always leave an open door, right? Put on as much pressure as you want, as much pressure as you can, but leave at least one hand semi-extended to say, this is how you can do what you're meant to do, right? So if they're not doing anything on the environment, on climate, keep protesting, keep bringing up, keep going to meetings they're meant to be at, keep doing things, keep writing in the press, but also give them a way out, right? And then give them different types of ways out. Give them a way out that actually makes a difference, right? And if they take the way out, you know, even politicians you don't like, it's quite important to acknowledge they've done that, right? Because that encourages them to do the same thing again. And I think yeah.
So not only them, it also encourages other politicians as
Absolutely.
well.
Absolutely.
Kind of one thing I just want to kind of touch upon, Abdiaziz, is the role that social media has, other media platforms, because things are just changing so rapidly, right? And I think even politicians, as slow as they can be, are starting to really realize, shit, people are engaging with us on different platforms. People just aren't coming to our surgeries once a month. Because traditionally, people would, if you want to get in touch with your elected representative or whatever, you'd have to first and foremost find out like how you can get the information where the surgeries are, then turn up. So it was quite laborious. It was quite inaccessible, in all honesty. Like a disabled person couldn't just go and see their elected representative. Whereas now with social media, like it provides a different dynamic. And even if they're not your MP, do you know what I'm saying? Like you can still engage with them and kind of really put pressure on them in different ways and stuff like that. But it's how, like, have you, like, I don't know if you can share some case studies or stories in terms of how, not necessarily politicians using social media well, but the power of basically, for example, was it one like it's, because there's been certain kind of non-serious campaigns where basically politicians have been called out on social media. And they'll be like, for example, everyone get this trending, we're going to bombard this MP to push for this to kind of happen, or even just exposing our elected representatives on social media. It plays a big part, basically. So and even till today, politicians are still trying to understand how they can best utilize this, because it can be so archaic at times, especially with so much politicians who are really, really old, basically. So in terms of, you could just, in terms of the relationship between ordinary citizens and the tool that they have got, the media tool that they can use to engage and leverage. Let's be honest, people just aren't getting in touch or engaging with politicians to say hello. How often do you see people reach out to politicians saying, hey, great job on that, mate? Like, it's very rare. People kind of really get to say, wait a minute, this is what I want you to do. This is what I care about. Why have you done this kind of thing, right? But it's just, yet again, just another tool kind of thing.
So in the UK, we have Ed Balls Day, right? Which is a day dedicated every year on Twitter to a Labour politician called Ed Balls, who once tweeted out the words Ed Balls, right?
Just a bit of context on that very quickly. The reason why he did that is he tried to search for his own name, right? So he thought where you put a tweet was a search box. So he just tweeted his name, basically, because he just wanted to see what people were saying about him, but he just tweeted his name and he just became quite infamous. Sorry.
And that's exactly the point. By the way, at the time, he was, the shadow chancellor or something, right? Like, it shows you that even politicians who are meant to be in incredibly powerful positions, who are meant to be kind of busy, I don't know, writing incredibly complex pieces of policy or government, whatever, genuinely want to know what people think about them, right? It's almost sad to say, but it's true, right? Now, what that means is there's an opportunity for us as activists, for us as people who want to get involved in the political process, that if every other door is shut out, we still have the door of social media, of the public space, of the public forum, because actually you'd be surprised how many people are reading it. You'd be surprised how many people are watching it. You'd be surprised how many people in politics genuinely care whether the likes and the retweets and the other things are coming through, right? Because it can be an incredibly isolating place. You know, people talk about political bubbles, but the bubble is also affecting the politician. Their sense of reality is being distorted. They're going from meeting to meeting, event to event, scripted, organized, things they're going to, right? Actually, bursting that bubble and actually getting a sense of reality is not always true. And then there's form of their version. And then actually, the more famous the politician gets, the worse this gets, right? Is that the more, you know, suddenly social media is almost a form of real life. It's the closest thing to people who seem real. And yet social media might be full of bots, right? So this is the fascinating thing, but actually it's one of the reasons why going to see a politician can be powerful, because you're actually breaking through the bubble and having that conversation with them sometimes. I'm not saying every politician will be affected, but it's also why social media isn't something you can leave behind. The citizen is constantly trying. So, you know, I always think this, the job of the activist or the campaigner is to be impossible to ignore. And what a politician will often do, because they're getting 15, 20, 30 different people trying to pull them in different directions, is they're trying to ignore things, right? So the question is, how can you be impossible to ignore, right? And I think that's actually where I often think people who are in the arts or people in culture or people in theater even are much, much better, have a much keener sense of what is the impossible to ignore. What is the interesting? What is the thing that gets attention, right? What's the thing that makes it impossible for the politician to completely ignore? And actually, often the thing that needs to be married up is the interesting, attention-grabbing thing and the location. Is the location a place that the politician will be? Because often we do really good stunts and stuff, but they're places politicians don't go. And we may go to places politicians go, but we don't get the attention. So if you can marry those two up and get the attention, the place that the politicians go, and you can turn it into something persuasive or something that's positively affecting or something that produces meetings and other things that might be politically valuable, it's actually a very powerful equation. And that's why the member of the public, with their imagination and their sense of what's possible, is an incredibly powerful person in the political process, because actually they're one of the rare things that brings a new idea into a bubble that otherwise might be quite closed. Right. And just to give, you know, it's why, you know, you saw Obama. It's why he would give you these personalized stories. They're probably the only people he'd met all week. Right. Right. And it's actually one of the things that Obama did, weirdly enough, is that he always used to have this thing where people write to the president of the United States of America. He always made sure to read, I think, 10 letters a day or a week or something. That he would. Yeah, he'd have 10 letters that were written by random members of the public, sent to his office, because I think he completely understood what it's like that he's living in a bubble. And especially the US president, it's a security bubble. You literally never meet anyone that you haven't scripted to meet, right? And that's where we enter politics. We break the script sometimes, right?
Do you know, Abdiaziz, we've talked a lot about ordinary citizens and engaging with politicians and all that sort of stuff, because there's many different ways you can engage in politics, right? Again, it seems quite broad, right? Yeah. One of the ways you can engage in politics is yourself being a politician.
Absolutely. Right?
Like, how often, because the thing is, like, for so long we kind of think like, well, these people are there by merit, which we, as we know, working in this space, it is not necessarily by merit kind of thing, right? But also one of the things that I struggle with, Abdiaziz, is when someone asks me, Magid, how can I be a politician? Because there isn't a clear route. It's not like, well, if you do this, you get past this level, then you pass this level. It doesn't work like that. And in some way, it's great because it's really inclusive and but at the same time, it's not the most fairest way kind of thing, because one of the examples of that is looking at a government cabinet, which, in all honesty, is some of the most incompetent people, yet who are actually running the country, making decisions that are going to impact every single one of us in the country and beyond, right? So it's like, well, within the democratic system we've got political parties. Well, which political party are you going to generate? How are you going to maneuver? Like, it's not as simple as if somebody was to ask you the question, well, how can I'm tired? Because I'll be quite honest with you, especially I get this mainly from young people, young activists as well, right? And I kid you not, I see they are so much more equipped and would make better politicians and councillors than some of the politicians that I've worked with. Because what do we, you know, is this kind of like power imbalance, right? Because what do we see when we see politicians? Suits. It kind of like, in some ways, there is kind of this imposter syndrome, but people just necessarily think, well,
Yeah.
Surely I can never kind of do that, right?
Yeah.
But what would you say in terms of like breaking the myths of being a politician, basically?
Do you know what? And I'm not just saying this because, you know, we're on this call together, but I actually think that having people like yourself who are in politics, who've done it, who've kind of shown what it's like to be elected, but actually also to be elected and then stay authentic, stay yourself, to dress the way you want to dress, act the way you want to act, do the things you want to do, right? And go speak to different people that other people won't speak to, meet with people that other people won't meet with, go places where other people won't go. That is the myth-shattering experience, right? People need to see that it's possible to then begin to believe that it's possible, right? And it makes it difficult for the first couple of people who do it. But after that, it gets to a point where people will be surprised that it was ever different at all, right? I'll give you a really random one. I was watching, because I'm boring, right? I was watching a football match from 19 something, whatever, right? And like everyone's wearing hats, right? Everyone is wearing hats, right? It's all men and they're all wearing hats, right? So whenever a goal happens, they're like, wait, where are the hats nowadays? Where are the hats at football? And this is like a random question to ask, but it shows you how things change so much sometimes that you forget it was ever any other way, right? And I think if the same can happen with politics as well, right? I think if you can have Alexander Ocasio-Cortez go from being a barmaid to actually one of the best congresswomen, right? If you can have yourself become the Lord Mayor of Sheffield and then a member of the European Parliament and never have to wear a suit to be allowed to do it, right? That begins to spread the story that maybe it's not what they told us. Maybe things are actually different. Maybe there is a way into this politics. Now, I will say, like you said, the way they try to keep it difficult is they try to lock politics up inside political parties, and they try to lock it up in processes, and they try to lock it up in systems. But I have to say, there's the Picasso line in that, which is sometimes you've got to learn the rules to break the rules, right? That's the part that we sometimes, especially anyone who's, those of us who are more inclined to enjoying life as opposed to sitting in long, difficult council meetings, right? The bit that we underestimate is that sometimes you do have to learn the rules and you do have to learn the system. But what you can't get rid of is your authenticity and your intention and that desire to actually do something more interesting with the system and to maybe even have the power to change the system at some point, right? That's the key thing. The worst thing is to go into politics because you want to change it and then end up just like any other politician, right? Because if you do that, you don't just betray yourself, you betray everyone that was hoping, right, that you would show them that another way is possible.
You know what? People would argue the words integrity and politicians don't go together, right? But like, in all honesty, like, of course, authenticity is really, really important. And in some ways, I kind of feel really fortunate. I guess even in my experience is that I never really conformed, even with the political party that I was a member of. For me, of course, people would try and sway me to be like, well, maybe you should. Of course, I felt pressure. Of course, I kind of had weight on me and stuff like that. But I think I kind of just stuck to my own goals kind of thing. But what I'm trying to get to is like, is it like, in your opinion, like is it possible to hold on to your integrity and be a politician in terms of, well, like this is a caveat to it, right? And make it far. Because of course, there are so many amazing local councillors. Yeah. There are so many great MPs, but with the reputation of politicians being so low kind of thing, it's one can be forgiven for thinking, well, if you've even made it up the greasy pole, yeah, you haven't got any integrity. It's like, is it basically like, is it even possible?
One thing I would never, ever underestimate is the degree to which there are ideas and thoughts that exist just below the surface that we haven't fully appreciated just how many people hold them. So let me give two examples. Take the example of someone like Jeremy Corbyn, who any political analyst sitting in 2015 would have said that no one from his wing of the Labour Party has any chance of ever being the leader of the Labour Party. When Diane Abbott last ran, she got 3%. That's how much, quote unquote, those people will get. People in that kind of political camp. But there was clearly a bubble just underneath the surface of not just thousands, but what we later found out to be hundreds of thousands of people who were waiting for a character like Jeremy Corbyn, right? Now, whatever you think of Jeremy Corbyn, it's kind of by the by. The point is that there were hundreds of thousands of people who were waiting for someone like him. And if he hadn't run, we would never have known. And we would have carried on, and we would have had another normal politician, and maybe we would have got Keir Starmer early, and, so on and so forth, right? It just kind of, we would never have known. In the same way that if there was never a Brexit referendum, we may never have realized that there were hundreds of thousands, millions of people in the UK who could be swayed by a largely anti-immigrant message. Maybe we would never have found out. Maybe that message would have died off and people just wouldn't have thought about it, and other politics would have replaced it, and so on and so forth. So sometimes we cannot assess, and we cannot fully know what energies exist just below the surface, right? And I say all this to say this. I think there is, if I had to guess, an energy for an authentic politician, right? Or for authentic politicians. Kind of what Jeremy Corbyn was a type of, right? People who have kind of been committed to causes for a long time. People who do everything they can not to, quote unquote, sell out, if you want to call it that, right? People who try to maintain their integrity under the most extraordinary amount of pressure. And I just think there are hundreds of thousands, not millions of people who are willing to give those people a chance, because it's kind of what they've kind of been looking for. And I think that's the bit of the story that's been missed out, is that the fact that so many of us connect a lack of integrity with politics, the fact that so many of us connect boring people in suits with politics, the fact that so many of us connect I couldn't be asked to look at the TV when they came on to politics, tells me that there is a lot of space for I can be asked to look at the TV, something that isn't boring suits, and something that has a lot more integrity, right? I think there are signs that there is that space, and maybe we just need a new form of vehicle. Maybe there's another way of getting there. It's about, we have to be imaginative about how we get there. But I actually think the energy and the sense of that being possible is absolutely there. And people are looking for someone with integrity that maintains their authenticity and that actually gets far.
Yeah. Do you know, on that note, Abdiaziz, I kind of want to just briefly touch upon, explore behind the scenes. So like I said, to have somebody like that to even get to there, there's going to have to be movements that are built. They're going to have to be like certain mechanisms, it never takes one person. One thing you realize, it's just never one person. Of course, many people know Jeremy Corbyn, but a lot of people might not necessarily know the movement that kind of actually got into momentum, that kind of got him to where he was, basically. Even same with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. What do they call it? The Democratic, what are they called?
Is it Democrats for Justice?
Yeah, Democratic Justice, right? So how important is it in terms of the role of institutions, movements, and those who aren't front-facing individuals, leaders, in the role of creating better politics, creating a better society, and actually changing politics for good?
100%. Really, I have to say, without degenerating degenerating the conversation to the point of talking about it as if it's marketing. Really, the candidate is really just a face, right? What really matters is the movement and the energy and the people who put their time into it. It's like Bernie Sanders says, it's not me, it's us, right? And I think that's an authentic understanding that we're only there because of you. We're only there because of you, and by you I mean the crowd, everyone else, the donations, the campaign team, the energy, the people who actually do some of the strategizing, some of the other stuff. People have different skill sets. People come with different energies, and those energies are what these movements require. And the person is only ever the face of that energy, right? And by the way, it exists the same on the right, by the way. There's people with incredible amounts of money and incredible amounts of investment who want to make a lot of money off one of their politicians winning, and their politician is again just the face of that, right? Their politician is just the face of someone who would like to make a lot of profit off a business deal they've already sorted out, but they could do with the government to make it easier for them, right? But that's what we're up against. And I think the movement building is completely right. I will happily argue that Jeremy Corbyn does not make it into the leader's office at the Labour Party without the Stop the War coalition, right? It's because the Stop the War coalition galvanized hundreds of thousands, millions of people, that even a decade later, there were still hundreds of thousands of people who identified as anti-war and for whom Jeremy Corbyn was one of the leaders of the anti-war movement, who then turned their anti-war sentiment into a Labour vote, right? And in the same way, AOC is there actually because of the energy that comes from a Bernie Sanders. For the first time he ran, AOC herself has said this, right? That when she was a bomb and it was people like Bernie, it was Bernie Sanders that actually motivated her and energized her. That's the thing. The whole point of having these characters that every so often come and have the energy is so they can unleash the energy and the potential of thousands of other characters. You transform communities, you transform cities, you transform countries little by little by little, right? And yes, there's moments where there's a big election and we have to get strategic and we have to think about how to win each seat and each door and so on and so forth and so on and so forth. And yes, there's a time for that kind of machine politics. But the machine doesn't matter without fuel. And that fuel is the energy of people and their belief, right? Which is, like I was saying earlier, which is why those who hate progressive politics always tell us there is no alternative. That is what they need to say. It's the only way they can demotivate us enough to make sure we never leave the house at all. But although, having said that, nowadays, the internet means you can do a lot of campaigning at home.
Just, does anybody have any questions, at all? Abdiaziz, one of the things.
So I've got a question.
Yeah, shoot.
I was typing it. I was wondering, it's like you guys have been great. It's been like very fascinating. It's like one question I have is like, how do you both stay optimistic about it all? Because I feel like it's very hard to stay optimistic. I think that change can actually happen. It feels like there's like a collection of like control that is like getting harder and harder to break, and therefore like how do you stay optimistic? Yeah, that's the question basically.
Great question. And I guess in a nutshell is that the alternative is too bleak, if I'm being honest with you. And it's just, whether that be personal experience and seeing the people who I work with, people are kind of, I think it's just a refusal to accept that this is as good as it gets, basically. And understanding also that there is a better society, a better world that is possible. But of course, it only comes if we actually work for it. So instead of just accepting that, as he's saying, that there is no alternative, there really is a better alternative. And the thing as well with hope, I guess the thing with hope that in itself, it can just be a bit too spectatorial. It can be a bit, you can forgive someone for being a bit naive just by hope kind of thing. But that's why, I guess, as well as having hope in itself, as good as it is, you need to kind of really couple it up with some sort of action. So it's, yes, I am optimistic. Yes, I am hopeful, but I'm also going to actually do something, basically. And I guess you also really just get many people who are just, and I get it, like just a bit indifferent about it or whatever. And just to quote the philosopher Abraham Heschel, who said, indifference is more insidious than evil itself, which I know is a bit harsh, a bit deep, but it kind of really hits the core of the fact that it's, whether something necessarily affects us or not, we really haven't got the we haven't got the privilege of being indifferent, basically. And yes, at times, I'll be honest with you, Fred, it is difficult. I do get wary. I do kind of just get tired, and it is difficult, basically. And I think that's why, personally, myself, I build my own kind of coping mechanisms, that be with friends, family, other people, and even just speaking about it really, really kind of helps to kind of just share and necessarily kind of talk about it. But what's your thoughts on that, Abdiaziz?
No, I have to agree with everything you said, actually. And the only thing I'd add is, it's like Martin Luther King Jr. said, right? The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, right? We only really need to win a few times. And we're very used to losing, right? And we're demoralized by losing and losing and losing and losing. But the hope has to be this, that in the one win we have, we can build more than all the losses can take away, right? Because that's really the commitment we have to make. Our commitment is to that possibility, right? Our commitment is to the knowledge that something better can be built. right? And I think that in that commitment, we wrap up the idea that they cut and they destroy and they demoralize and whatever, but one good government, one good win, right, can build things that absolutely alter lives. The other thing is, every year there's a new wave of young people who turn up with fresh optimism, fresh enthusiasm, right? And no matter how much, how much we feel like we're getting older every day, right? For them, the world is still young, right? And it's still full of possibilities, right? And their energy is also very incredibly sustaining, right? And I think that kind of summarizes my sense is that, I don't think you lose forever. I think at some point you win. I mean, if you had said to me, if you'd said like, in 2010, 2011, right, that Bernie Sanders would be sitting there in America right now, basically drafting gigantic infrastructure bills. And okay, the Senate in America isn't, is blocking it, but actually the president's kind of supportive, right? If you could tell me that Bernie Sanders is helping to craft what looks like a new deal, that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is incredibly popular, that we could even, that we came so close to a progressive government in the United Kingdom, right? The thing that is really important is that we shatter the sense of impossibility. And someone like a Jeremy Corbyn, Ocasio-Cortez, all the other politicians that we see, anything that we see that is hopeful is proof of the possible. And that's what sustains us. We're sustained by the fact that we constantly see things that are possible, right? And it's, that's always exciting, right? It's always exciting to know that tomorrow morning something extraordinary might happen.
Brilliant. On that note, I just want to give a massive thank you and a round of applause, virtual round of applause for Abdiaziz Suleiman for joining us today. And thanks to everyone for listening. And just a final plug on the wonderful funding opportunities we've got as part of Tour de Moon Festival. So everyone, please do go on tourdemoon.com/apply to check out those opportunities. And on that note, thank you very much.